counted 40 years of marriage, a great and very exemplar couple for others. They were together, you can imagine, for 40 years, and they were a great example to other people. And so they were asked once what was the secret to the success of their marriage. And so husband replied, "No, the secret is none other than going out for dinner twice a week." No, not going to Mass together or praying or anything else, but going out for dinner twice a week. So people were amazed and asked him again, and he says, a nice restaurant and nice meal, light of a candle, and then good conversation and coming back home. They were surprised, and so they asked him again, "Is that really the secret?" "Yeah, that's the secret. She goes out on Tuesdays and I go out on Fridays." It seems that the only way to avoid conflict in our lives is to go in two separate ways. If each one goes its own way, there's no conflict, but there's no relationship either. If there's commitment, there's always conflict involved, but there's also growth, there's challenge, there's walking or running together in the same direction. It is the pain, but the pain of growth. And I believe that the Lord wants us to live committed lives. He wants us to live in a committed way, committed to God and committed to others. But He wants us for sure to invest our hearts, to pour out our hearts in whatever we do, not just pass by this life. He wants us to live committed to God and committed to others. Father Ignatius spoke about this last Sunday on what he called belonging and believing. The more we belong in the community, the easier it is to believe in Christ, and vice versa. Today, our great Master, Jesus Christ, here wants to teach us another important lesson for us who want to live committed lives: conflict resolution, how to deal with conflict in our lives. The first community we read in the Gospel today started to experience the first conflicts. Peter asks, "Lord, what should I do if my brother sins against me?" Note that it's a brother. It's not those who were persecuting them or people from outside the community, but the brothers. They started experiencing in that first of Christians that there was some conflict. And so Peter goes to Jesus. And Jesus, He's not surprised. And He doesn't tell Peter that there shouldn't be any conflict in the community. But He teaches Peter and all of us how to deal with conflict and how to grow through conflict. The only way to resolve conflict is to face it. There's no other way. Jesus, during His life, never ran away from any legitimate conflict that was presented to Him. Never. There are two ways, two modals that are wrong because they don't really solve the problem. But there are two modals that we act out of, and many times in our lives we deal with conflict in this way, but we don't really solve the problem. The first way is avoiding. Many times we tend to avoid conflicts all the time. So we try not to enter into any dispute with other people in any conflict. And so we think that we solve problems, but we know that the more we bury things in our hearts, when we bury them alive, they grow in us. They don't go away. We have that thinking that maybe time would heal it, but time doesn't heal anything. In fact, for big matters, it makes it worse because those things grow within us. And the second way that we have to deal with conflict many times is to appease all the time, to give in. Give people, let people go their own way. But it is a false peace because we don't solve the conflict and we create, a separation and division with other people. So when we don't face conflict, I think most of the times is out of fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of being hurt. In my experience, it's almost always coming from fear. When this happens, when we let fear take the best of us and we don't deal with conflicts in our lives, we become more distant, we become defensive, and we become demanding. In the first place, we become more distant from others because there's something in between us and the other person that we are not talking about. And that creates a separation emotionally and intellectually. We start to be more separated from others emotionally and intellectually because we don't agree and we're not talking about those disagreements. We become more defensive as well. As Peter we see in the gospel today, if my brother sins against me, how many times should I forgive him? Peter is just putting himself in the center of this whole situation, not trying to find the truth that there's behind. We become defensive. It's all about me. And we also become demanding, as if everyone owes us something, and we look at the take in all relationships. So I would like to share with you in this night 5 steps to conflict resolution that will help us much in our lives. 5 steps that we can put into practice in order to resolve in a Christian way conflicts in our life. The first step is to accept it, to accept that there's conflict in our lives. By this, I don't mean that you go out looking for conflict or starting the conflict yourself, but accepting that conflict is a part of human relationships, something inherited with it. Many times we tend to think that with new situations that happen in our lives, maybe they are going to be ideal. I now come to college, away from family, no more conflict. It's not going to happen. Or maybe I am joining this new club or this new group. No more conflict. No. Or maybe anything that is new in our lives, a new job, a new living situation, new friends, or even, coming to a new church, a new community. No more conflict. No, it's not that way how it happens. So accepting that conflict is a part of our lives is a huge step already in order to dealing with those conflicts in our lives. It is a huge step to avoid frustration in us and to start living a more realistic and a more committed life. The second step is to make the first move. If the first one was to accept that there is conflict, the second one is to make always the first move. As I said, there's always that fear or that pride that comes on the way, and don't let us, make that first move, be the first ones to move toward reconciliation. St. John, who was a great friend of Jesus and knew him very well and knew his teachings, heart to heart, and what he shares every time he speaks in the Bible or what he wrote is amazing because he has a knowledge of the heart of Jesus that nobody else has. And he shares a secret with us. He says, love overcomes all fear. Love overcomes all fear. So the only way that we can overcome that fear of making that first move in order to address conflict in our lives is if we love more the other person or the relationship itself than our own fear. That's the only way we are going to overcome that fear, that initial fear. Some of the hardest words to hear or the hardest words to say are, "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Or "We need to talk about this." Tough words to say, tough words to hear, but so important. They are the first step to move towards reconciliation and dealing with conflict. We can spend days and months thinking that we need to be approached by the other person, but reconciliation will never happen. But if we who are here take this as a mission, never delaying a tough conversation because it's tough, we will become peacemakers. we will be making that first move towards reconciliation. I'd like to share with you a short testimony from a lady who had a great conversion in her life. She was formerly an atheist, a feminist. She's a psychologist, and she used to teach people away from God, telling them that they needed to free themselves from God in order to be truly free. Through the Alpha courses, she went through a huge conversion, and she shares that conversion with us in this evening, and I'd like to share with you a part of her conversion story. She says, "After my conversion, I had an important argument with my sister. She told me that I was crazy and asked me not to talk about God to her children. Literally, she told me, 'Don't poison my children.' That hurt me. I felt that she was attacking my faith, and very angry, I stayed distant from her. We didn't talk to each other for several months. Besides my anger, I realized that I wasn't at peace in my heart. My sister had lost a daughter some years ago. For that reason, she suffers a lot. And I always felt a deep compassion for her. So I asked her if we could get together and talk about this. I decided that I wouldn't demand anything from her, and that I wasn't going to wait for her to ask for forgiveness, but I would ask for her forgiveness first. I prayed a lot before opening my mouth. I prayed to the Holy Spirit that the words that came out of my lips may be filled with love and mercy. I felt that it wasn't me who spoke, but Jesus speaking through me. And it was in that moment that we were able to set our pride aside and start forgiving and being forgiven." Beautiful testimony of how when we make that first move that we are afraid of, then reconciliation comes. And this testimony really leads us to our third step. The third step is begin with what's my fault, as the lady in the testimony did. Begin with that is our fault. There are 3 words that are a key to any human heart. 3 words that when you say them, they're a key to open any human heart, even the hardest ones. I am sorry. When you say those words, it's almost like magic. Any heart will be open to you. Maybe 99.9% of the problem of the blame is on the other person. But there is always that 0.1% that we can start with. I remember a few years ago, I had an argument with our priest who we are really good friends, and we were working on some apostolic things, and we were not seeing eye to eye on what we should do, and the argument, become harder. And so we left it there and we said, maybe we should talk tomorrow. And so through that whole day, I was, thinking of reasons why I was right and he was wrong. I came up with this list almost of reasons why I was right and he was wrong. Next day we got together to talk, and we sat down, and he started and he said, I am sorry. I shouldn't say the things that I said yesterday the way I said them. Argument was over. Because once reconciliation happened, then we were able to figure things out. And we both wanted the same thing. But we had gotten emotional to that topic and weren't able to see the truth. So always begin with what's our fault, asking for forgiveness. That opens the conversation up to the truth. The 4th step is decide to forgive. I say that again, decide to forgive. Forgiveness is a decision, not a feeling. Forgiveness is a decision, not a feeling. A decision that you can make right there and right then. You can decide to forgive. Then, of course, we'll need to honor that decision. But the more we make that decision to forgive the other person, our feelings can be aligned in the direction that we want to guide our lives, and the Lord wants to guide our lives. So making the decision of forgiving the other person. The first reading today proposes us a key forgiving thought. This is a key forgiving thought that we can use when we get too caught up in the problem. Many times we get too caught up on this that hurt us, and it's so hard to forgive because we are just focusing on that. The book of Sirach proposes us that we think about this. Remember your last days. Set enmity aside. Remember the day of your death. Think of that and set enmity aside. When we think of our last moments on this earth, that puts everything into the right perspective. That helps us to think in a more clear way. So think about your last days and you'll be able to forgive. So when you are too caught up with something that really hurt you, ask yourself, if I was about to die, would I let this be in between this person and myself? And maybe you can find in that way the strength to decide to forgive. And the fifth one and last step into conflict resolution. Focus on reconciliation, not on resolution. Focus on reconciliation, not on resolution. Reconciliation is re-establishing the relationship, the liaison, the link, the connection that there is in between the two of us. Resolution would be trying to solve every point of disagreement in the conversation. And it's nearly impossible most of the times. But if you reconcile with the other person, then you will be able to see eye to eye. 5 steps to conflict resolution in our lives. Jesus is the one who solved the ultimate conflict that there was in our lives, the ultimate conflict between God and man. He made the first move. He decided to forgive us. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, decided to forgive each one of us, so that through His example, we may learn how to deal with conflict in our lives, so that we may have peace within us. Christ wants us to have that inner peace. Each one of us here tonight, He wants us to live with that inner peace in our souls. But the means that He proposes are really good news for us tonight. The way to that inner peace is not avoiding conflict, but it is exactly through conflict and knowing how to deal with that conflict that we can find true peace in our lives. So in the following moment of silence that we'll have right now, I invite you to think of that person or that situation that maybe already came up to your mind or your heart as I was speaking. And think and ask the Lord the grace and the wisdom to be able to make that first move towards inner peace.